Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedComms These are services, resources, activities for people who work in and around the global MedComms community, by which I mean medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and also lots of resources for people who want to join our business, understand MedComms better. You'll find a lot of information there at firstmedcommsjob.com. So today we've got another of our webinars. I'm delighted to welcome three guys here from Langland. I'm not going to try and introduce you. You're going to introduce yourselves and you're going to take us through a presentation and then the Q&A. So everybody in the audience, get ready, send us your questions. But to kick things off, I'm going to hand over to Annette, please. Thank you very much. Thanks,
Peter, and hi to everybody who's joined us today. So just by way of introduction, my name's Annette Keith. I'm a head of editorial here at Langland. I've been in MedComms since 2004, first with some independent agencies, and then subsequently joined the Publicis group about 6 years ago. I think anyone who knows me, who's worked with me, knows how passionate I am about what we do. So I've really kind of enjoyed working with Drew and Diane to pull these slides together, and I hope everybody enjoys listening as much as we've enjoyed putting them together. And I'm looking forward to hearing other people's perspectives. So please do use the chat and the Q&A to drop us your thoughts along the way. And I'll pass to Diane to introduce herself.
Great. Thanks, Annette. I'm Diane Ross, and I'm the head of scientific strategy at the Langland team. I'm not going to count how many years I've been in the MedComms business. And unfortunately, most things people see when they see my name is thinking that I might be Diana Ross and I might burst into song. So again, if any of you have come for that, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. But also, you know, I love what we do. I am very curious. I love to learn every day. And I think that is a great thing about working in MedComms, that every day there is something new and something that we get to explore and innovate around. And pass to Drew.
Thank you. We would take you over Diana Ross any day, Diane. So hello everybody, I'm Drew. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at Langland. I've been at Langland for about a year now, but I started, like Annette, back in 2004 as a medical writer, gradually worked my way up, and then most recently was a managing director at Lucid before joining Langland last year. And joining Langland really was to get back to my passion, which is the science, the content, the strategy. So I'm really excited to be here today, and it's lovely to see names, I think, from all of my ex-agencies here as well, actually, which is really lovely. So what are we here to talk about? Annette, I think you want to project. So something amazing has happened over the last year, and I don't know if everyone else has seen this as well, but going from a job where probably 1 or 2% of my friends and family knew what I did, now everybody talks the same language. Everyone's talking about clinical trials, drug development, KOLs even. And amongst that, there are even people who have become experts over a year, who will preach about what they've learned and what they know above the actual experts. So what we thought was a really interesting thing to look at was the communications over the pandemic, what has been good, what has been well communicated, and what could potentially have been better, and then map that to what we ourselves do and what we can learn for MedComms going forward. Now, just before we go into that, I am going to do just 2 minutes on Langland, because it's probably a name that not many of you associate with MedEd. So Langland, the name, does have a long, rich history in MedComms, and now does also have a deep expertise in medical education and strategy. And what happened was, around the middle of last year, we brought 4 agencies together. So Real Science, Resolute, Publicis Life Brands, and Langland all came together under the Langland brand. And this wasn't a consolidation by any means. It was a very deliberate action to bring the specialisms together to enhance them all. So the specialisms we brought together all under the one roof are clinical trial experience, so that's recruitment, retention, clinical trial branding and investigator relations, medical strategy and education, PR and policy, and then advertising. And the premise really was that, first of all, from a very functional point of view, cross-functional work is easier all under one roof. But I think more importantly, more powerfully, was that we'd seen the value of bringing different perspectives together to solve problems. So whether we work on a medical education initiative or a PR initiative now, we bring all of the disciplines together at the creation phase so that we can create more creative, deeper thought through solutions for our clients. And that is Langland in a nutshell. Over to the good stuff, and Annette's going to start us.
Thanks, Drew. Yeah, so without further ado, let's get started. So I think what we first considered was, we sort of put our heads together and thought, what really makes for good medical education and medical communication, and in fact, communication as a whole, really. Because when we're communicating, we're not really communicating for the sake of communication, we're communicating to make a difference. In order to do that, we need the communication to be clear so people understand what the messages are. We need it to be memorable, so nothing gets lost the moment somebody stops engaging with your content. We need to be trusted, so people have a believe what they need to do. It instills accountability. So especially if we're trying to change a behaviour, then those people who are receiving this communication need to believe that it's on them to make a change. It's not just everybody else's problem, and that we provide some direction. So people know what it is that we need them to do. So as Drew mentioned, we thought that we could look at some of the communications around the COVID-19 pandemic against some of these criteria, and see what we could come up with, and have a really good discussion about what makes good MedComms. So I think, like I said before, we've really enjoyed putting this together, and we're really keen for everybody to add their own perspectives. We could have talked about this for hours, but we've really kind of pared it down to the sort of really top line information. So hopefully we'll have a really rich discussion afterwards, where I'm sure there's a lot more we can bring into it. So I'm going to hand over now to Diane to take you through some of the HCP comms.
Great, thanks, Annette. So what we did when we thought, well, what have HCPs been communicating around in terms of COVID? The first thing that we did was to go and speak to one of our social media experts within Langland, and we decided that we would focus on UK HCPs and what have they been communicating on Twitter around the topic of COVID-19, just to get a sense of what the conversations have been. And you can see on the next slide that just in the little call out graph there, that actually over the year, obviously, as we would all expect, there's been a huge amount of conversations about COVID, and actually it reached over 2 billion conversations across the year. And that was just within the UK, or for UK people. And then we looked to see, well, what was that in terms of HCPs and whether that trend was similar. And so you can see here, just from the shape of the graph, that actually the timing of the noise and the peak is at a very similar position between the general conversation that was happening on Twitter as well as that from HCPs, which is not surprising as we were all going through the pandemic at the same time. So obviously there was a huge peak early on last year around March time as we were going into that first lockdown, but it's interesting to see how that has also kind of tailed off with that feeling. And I know that a few of us have mentioned that, of kind of nearly conversation fatigue. Are we all just a bit bored of maybe retweeting what someone else is tweeting about COVID? Do we want to keep talking about it? And what I thought was interesting was, even with all the positive news that came out in December around the vaccines, you don't see that same kind of spike coming back up. So I think there probably is, even with good news, a bit of the fatigue around this as a conversation. So we thought we wouldn't just look in terms of volume, but we would also look to see what the trend was in terms of what was being discussed and what these conversations were about. And again, we've just kind of tried to show a snapshot here of how did that evolve over time. So, at the start of the year, it was very much about, where is this virus come from? What is the outbreak? You can see a lot of mentions of China within that. And then as we move through the year, it becomes more focused on the NHS. And I remember all the discussions around the need for PPE and the importance of that. And so that was very much dominated, across that time in kind of March and April. And then as we move through into the summer, actually a lot more you can see here is about the government and about lockdown, which is quite interesting when we're like, this isn't general communications from the whole public, this was HCPs. So again, they were communicating not just on the health aspects, but also, you know, more broadly within the field. And you can see as we move into July on the bottom left, you know, a bit more just the vaccine starting to kind of come through in the conversations, and at the end of the year, how that very much dominated what was being talked about. And so I don't think any of that is probably a revelation. We've all lived through these conversations, but I think it's interesting to be able to see, you know, how you can track how conversations are changing over time, where the emphasis is. And so it's interesting to think about what we do in our day-to-day life of, you know, if it's around a new disease area or a new disease awareness campaign, how are conversations moving and how can we track how that is evolving, or about perceptions of a new treatment choice. So we also just looked at who was speaking, and a lot of the high profile HCPs, you know, didn't just comment on what was happening medically, but love to tell us about their boredom on Zoom or what they thought about the US election. So there was definitely, you know, a lot of conversations that are not just focused on the science or on the medical aspects. So some of you very kindly answered some of our little survey questions that we put out before the webinar. And definitely, I think from what we saw on Twitter, but from what you've told us as well, kind of conversations and messages from HCPs tend to be trusted. People think they're credible and we trust what they're saying. Whether they're always clear, I think can kind of maybe go both ways. I think they probably have some HCPs who are very much putting out kind of a clear story, whereas others are just, you know, commentating on the whole gamut of topics out there around COVID. Some of the ones I think that were more memorable for us when we looked at these checklists were around the ones that had more of that emotional content, whether it was the pleas around PPE or whether it was some of the commentary in terms of really the impact that these HCPs were facing within the hospitals. They were the type of comms that were kind of standing out, and you kind of remembered what the message was. Don't think hugely they provided much direction in terms of what we should be doing, and maybe not that sense of accountability. So when we looked at this checklist, this is how we rated it. So it would be interesting, and if you want to kind of comment that you think anything differently or agree, it'd be great to stick that in the chat. But I also just wondered, Drew, whether there was anything you thought wanted to disagree with, wanted to agree with.
Fully disagree. No, I think for me, the most interesting thing was, and there's no fault here, it was that, you know, when we think about communications, we're so careful about the cascade of communications, you know, from really understanding the data, getting it to our KOLs, and then through the broader medical community before the public. I think here, all the information was hitting every source at the same time. So I think, you know, in that initial bulge of tweets, there were conflicting discussions between doctors, you know, should you wear a mask, shouldn't you wear a mask, what's the right science? And I think that for me was one of the key things. You know, normally you'd look to the HCP community to provide direction here, but it just wasn't possible in this instance because of that rapidity of data and new information.
Yeah, I think the other thing that stood out for me is, even if you look at the top contributors, the very top people who were tweeting the most about COVID-19, they were still communicating about a lot of other things. And so actually there was a lot of kind of noise and not a clear kind of story from anybody across the board.
Cool. So I think we'll probably pick up on anyone's comments at the end, but Annette, if, you know, we obviously saw the HCPs were communicating a lot. I think the government was also communicating to us a lot. So I'll pass over to you for that section.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, so obviously we've all been we've all seen the government communications, and honestly we could have made the whole presentation, I think, about this, but I think I'm not going to play this because I know that we don't want to test the technology here, but if anybody hasn't seen this 17-second Matt Lucas clip, it's well worth watching for a bit of entertainment in these kind of difficult times, and I think it does summarize some of the early challenges with the communication from the government. And we know from our pre-meeting poll that 3/4 of you felt that Matt Lucas did a better job of being Boris Johnson than Boris himself. So so it's a bit of entertainment there. But more seriously, we looked at the public health campaign materials from the government. I think the first thing that is very clear to notice is how different they all look. And this really is just a snapshot of the materials that are available. And when we spoke to one of our creative directors in our CTE team, she really commented on the lack of a sort of unifying branding element throughout these pieces, which she pointed out was really important to kind of guide people so they know, who they're being communicated to from and what the subject is. I think if you take some of the individual pieces, we can see some kind of nice examples of using good kind of communication tools. So for example, the top 3 panels there show a good use of the rule of 3, which we know is a kind of well-established communication kind of tool. That the human brain likes things in 3s, and you can think of lots of examples of that over a number of different topics. Even like storytelling, you have the 3 little pigs and the 3 wise men and the 3 musketeers. So many examples, and also in public health campaigns like the Australian slip slop slap for sun cream, stop look listen for road safety, etc. So some kind of nice examples of those kind of ways in which people can help to understand a message. And very, I think the stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives, very instructional, tells you clearly what you need to do. I suppose at the other end of the spectrum, there's some really nice emotive communications there in the bottom right, which is some of the more recent materials. And this so much doesn't really tell you what to do. In fact, it doesn't really give any instructions at all, but it really appeals to your conscience. Look in her eyes and tell her you never bend the rules. I feel that's really quite powerful. And you can see this really personalized image on this page, and it's not just a number, it's a real person, and I think that really does speak to individuals. So I think that's quite a nice piece. Did want to touch on this particular iteration of the slogan, because this was widely criticised in the media, and I think probably rightly so, because stay alert and control the virus is very vague, ambiguous. What are you really going to do? So it's hard to remember it, even though it's in this kind of very short kind of rule of 3 format. But nevertheless, I think it's very easy to criticise, but it would be interesting if anybody's got any better ideas for what we could have done in this situation, because we were in a bit of a difficult situation coming out of a very clear rule to stay at home, to kind of having a bit more freedom, but still having some constraints. So in terms of the messaging from the government in general, I think we need to look across the board, and it's not just the kind of branding elements, but actually how the story develops over time. And I think this is where things fell down quite a bit, and the messaging changed so many times throughout the year, from staying at home to being encouraged to eat out, to protecting our NHS, to protecting the economy, to so many different messages, so many different rules, so many different exceptions to the rules across the year, that it's quite difficult for people to make head or tail of what they have to do about it. And then we thought it's not just about the communications themselves, but actually it's about the communicators. So we thought it was an interesting contrast between Chris Whitty, the man with all the data, and Jonathan Van Tam. So Chris Whitty is clearly a good scientist. He clearly is over all the data, and he has communicated very kind of formally on that perspective. And anecdotally, I think we found that people kind of trust him. He's a very trusted figure, but I guess the question is trust enough? Because one could argue that Jonathan Van Tam, who is now famous for his analogies, is really perhaps understanding the audience a bit better, and his communications could potentially be more influential in terms of helping people to behave in the way that we need them to. And then just finally in this section, I think we couldn't really present this webinar without showing these graphs from the October press conference, which were widely commented on from members of our own MedComms community on LinkedIn, I remember at the time, with plenty of people saying why the government needs a MedComms agency, and I think we'd all probably agree with that. And really it's just a case of, the classic case of trying to include too much information in such a way that trying to say too much and in fact you end up saying nothing at all. And I think aside from all the kind of QC issues that we could point out if we look carefully, there's really no clear message that comes across, and especially when it was a particular point in time when we really needed to get across that sense of danger and urgency to change behaviour. So overall, we kind of we gave all our criteria a big question mark, really, and I think there's some examples of good, some examples of bad. And I think the main thing for me was that lack of consistency, which I think did sort of undermine all of these different factors. So Drew, Diane, thoughts?
I think it's interesting for me, and as Drew mentioned at the beginning, you know, the difference between people not really ever understanding what you did as MedComms and also who the people were that you might listen to now JVT with his initials being banded about in my house, which seems very strange. But I do think for me, I would give him the tick for memorable. And I think, you know, there's been a lot of press coverage also saying how, you know, whatever phrase he says in the press briefing will be the headline the next day in the newspapers, and especially the ones I think in the most recent one about, you know, don't wreck this now, and that there's still places in the country that are burning quite hot. You know, that gives you a very clear picture in your mind in terms of what his message is. As you were reading through the, you know, his one about football there, I just realised why obviously they resonate with me, because, you know, as being a Scot, there's probably quite a lot of time we might be 3-0 up and then we lose 4-3. So that, now I've realised why, obviously that is why I like all of his little analogies.
I probably not a populist, but I have a bit of sympathy with the government on some of it. I think there was very bad examples, but I think the rapidity of all the data again, like the fact they have had to pivot a lot. But I think the one thing the government has to deal with, which I think to say pretty much we don't have to, is a highly combative media in the UK who pretty much want the government to slip up, or, you know, they won't actually report on the message, they'll report on what the message misses. So there's no cascade of information, there's no amplification of it. It's there to be torn down pretty much, which is, I feel like, a British media mentality. But I think it does point to the fact that, you know, we live in an age where actually, you know, the Congress, you could deliver a message and it will be delivered in your own time frame. Now people are tweeting about it as soon as it happens. So we are still, you know, living in a place where what we communicate will be amplified by people who we have no control over. So we have to be so concise and clear on our communications to make sure that they stay on track.
Yeah, I think I also have sympathy as well, because for the government, because things were changing so rapidly. And I think, you know, when you think about our world and how long it takes and how many people you have to get involved and how much research you have to do in terms of what, you know, messages and communications you're going to develop and share, that takes months and months, and really, you know, people probably had days, let alone, you know, weeks to kind of sort these things out. So definitely been a challenging job. So yeah. Drew,
okay,
over to you.
On to pharma, and I have seen a couple of questions come through, but we'll answer those at the end, so you're not being ignored. But just to round off things, PharmaComms, so our clients. So what have they been communicating about? And broadly, they have all followed true to form and have similar communications about clinical trials, vaccine development, mutations, and they've all followed relatively what we would I assume they would talk about. The one thing that probably has been missing from a lot of places has been information on the disease itself, which, you know, we would automatically assume when we were thinking about our work that would be there. But I guess because there's so much, you know, emerging evidence and information, that hasn't been the place. I think the one thing that all of this does, it has all been quite rational. And given the fact that, you know, all of these names are pretty much household names now. And as Diane said, you know, people are saying Pfizer and Janssen to me, who I know a year ago had no idea what they were. I wouldn't say that these have become go-to sources of information. So whether that's deliberate from the pharma, they don't want it, whether it's trust, or whether it's just, you know, signposting, these probably don't have the traffic that we might want to see from the platform that pharma companies have been given. One of the things, if you've gone to the next slide, please, Diane. Annette, sorry. One of the things we did like and actually did get more traction was when the pharma company showed a bit more emotion. And here, this was a really lovely, well, I thought it was lovely, around the need for vaccination that Pfizer did, which was really all about connecting to the human emotion about what you'd be able to get the tangible benefit of vaccination. And Pfizer also went a step further in the past couple of weeks. I don't know if anyone saw the Heinz baked beans and Weetabix Twitter argument, but they put the two together and various companies responded, and Pfizer got in on the joke, which I thought was very lovely to see, a nice personable human side from a pharma company, which I think would resonate more and help with that connection with a broader audience. But we did also have slightly less good communication, and again, I do have my sympathies here. But the AZ press release around their data, which on the face of it, a perfectly fine press release, but again, the rapidity of getting it done and then getting it out there meant that any small slight ambiguity or question mark is just going to be dissected, amplified, and create confusion where there really shouldn't be any. So unfortunately, the questions around the dosing took over the conversation of the efficacy of itself. Fortunately, it took a while to get ahead of the message. I think we did in the UK. I think AZ vaccine probably is still suffering from some of this miscommunication in Europe, where different directives were given. So it just does show again that the importance of that clarity of message and thinking about how your data or how your information is going to land in the real world, so that you can understand how to communicate effectively. So with the question marks here, but I feel they're equal signs rather than question marks, because I think there's probably been examples of good and not so good across all of the categories. I think there was an upswing in trust for the pharma industry, which is great. I don't know if that's been sustained, but it was. Some of them have been clear, some memorable, some less so. But I think the one thing for me that actually I feel like pharma could have done more was try to engage a broader audience with its communications, which I don't necessarily think it has done. The household names of Pfizer, etc., are household names now because of the BBC or ITV, not necessarily from the pharma companies themselves. But I think we've lost Diane, but hopefully she'll come back. Annette, I don't know if you've got any comment on that.
I think the AstraZeneca press release was such a sort of interesting and I guess so relevant to what we do, and I think it just highlights getting things right and accurate. It's never going to win you any prizes, but if you get it wrong, it's going to bite you pretty hard, and it's going to be very difficult to get back from. And I think AZ obviously had to work extremely hard to sort of come back from that poor communication, I suppose. But, I
heard on the radio this morning a lovely quote. Well, lovely, it's not that lovely, but it takes many years to build a reputation and 1 minute to ruin it. So yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, well, if we carry on, hopefully Diane will rejoin, but I think it's over to you to wrap up, Annette.
Sure, yeah. So taking all of those points into account, we thought let's wrap it up by and hopefully go into a good discussion about what does make good MedComms. I think the first thing to say is actually I think this whole situation has really highlighted the importance of what we do. And I heard a quote from a patient with long COVID on a podcast I was listening to just a couple of weeks ago. And this patient said, I phoned my GP and they said, sorry, we don't know how to help you. We're learning as well. And as a patient, that's the most mental health destroying thing. And I think, that really just speaks to the fact that the HCPs that we are dealing with, we need to educate them on the conditions that they're treating and on the medicines that they're using, so that they can provide the best care to their patients, not just from a physical point of view, but also from a mental point of view, mental health point of view as well. So what do we need to do and how do we do it? We've sort of put 5 points on this slide. We need to be consistent. I think that undermines kind of everything else you do if you're not consistent. Choosing language, data and imagery that require little cognitive effort to understand. You can use strategies like using analogy, using mnemonics, repetition to kind of reinforce the messages and help people remember them. As I said before, reporting data accurately, it's not going to win you any prizes, but it really needs to be done. accurately, precisely, and appropriately, more to the point. And choose your spokespeople carefully. You may well have the world expert in a disease area as your speaker, but if they can't communicate to the audience and you can't get those messages across, then you've really lost something there. I mean, what we normally do, and for this, you know, to ensure this, I've just got a few icons on here, and that they are a list of different sort of tactics and processes, I suppose, but I think they're all important. So, you know, we need to sort of really understand what we're talking about before we communicate it. I think there's I think it's Einstein that had a quote that says something like, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it well enough. I think we need to really have a deep understanding of what we're communicating about in order to be able to explain it in a simple and understandable way. So we need to do all that knowledge and insight generation. We you know, listen to experts from advisory boards, etc. And then building good scientific platforms and narratives so we can have a consistent story that can evolve in a sort of systematic way over time. Choosing the right speakers, we can do our KOL mapping exercises. We have things, editorial scientific reviews of the content to make sure that the language and the kind of execution of those materials are, you know, top quality. And QC processes, obviously, to make sure that we don't get anything wrong. But I guess the question is, and I'm going to hand over to you, Drew, you know, is that enough?
Well, no, it's through the basics. And do you know what? I think as you were going through that, just thinking about the pandemic and the communications, it just reinforces the importance of all the steps we go through. And I think sometimes when you're working on one piece of something, you can lose sight about, you know, why we're having this ad board. Well, it will impact the press release, which is maybe, you know, half a year away or whatever it is, but really understanding those data. So it just gives some really context for things we do. But I think there are, you know, other things that we need to think about. There's a couple of images on the next slide, which we could even go further. But I think the first one is really deep insights about the audiences that we're communicating with. I think we sometimes go some way to understand, you know, different types, different groups of people that we're communicating with. But if we don't go far enough, we're going to miscommunicate and get either no response, no direction, or, you know, at the very worst, a backlash. So, you know, just looking at some of the data on COVID here, you know, you can see why there were some differences in countries' responses. And then I think that on the right just talks to actually two of the points you raised, actually, which I think is thinking about data in probably a more emotive way. I think, you know, this graph, which you found in that, it's a very nice, it's a more emotive way of showing just the impact of deaths in the US. And so the, you know, the golden lines show people's lives they lived, and the grey lines show the years that they'd lost because they'd unfortunately been killed. So it looked at data in a different way, showed it in a different way to really impact more. So I think there's always things that we can do to think and push ourselves, both on understanding the audience and then how we communicate. And finally, I guess it all means perspectives, just thinking about something from every perspective to be able to truly be able to understand it and then communicate it. Which is quite hilarious because I didn't realize this was 6 different perspectives of the same building until Annette told me. But this is 6 different pictures of the Shard, from outside, from inside, etc. And it just made me step back and think, wow, yeah, actually, you know, you can't talk about a building properly just from the outside if you haven't seen the inside. So just a nice visual there on the importance of perspectives. And with that, I think we can go for some Q&A. Thank you.
Cool. Stop sharing.
Excellent. I'm going to jump back in then. That was there's so much in there that we could follow up. Just we might as well just acknowledge the fact that Diane's disappeared, and we're not sure whether she's going to come back or not. But I've not had a message at this end, so we'll just see if she does pop up or not. Otherwise, thank you, Annette and Drew, for not disappearing. I don't know about you guys. I've spent most of the last year just being very cross, I think, although that's what I'm being told. You know, and like what is it, Today on Radio 4 sort of thing, you know, which starts my day badly and it goes down from there sort of thing when I'm just shouting at people. But it was fairly recently that I just found myself thinking about the fact that it was actually some of the language that's being used about, you know, the safety of this or the safety of that, or it's just words are being used and phrases and language are being used, which I've been trained over years not to use, sort of thing. I thought that's fascinating. And it's very interesting and very easy for us, and why not in a situation like this, to be sort of armchair experts and critics and criticize stuff that people are doing. But, you know, I've sat in meetings like all of us have, meetings after meetings after meetings, days go by, weeks go by, trying to work out a little plan for a little leave piece for somebody or something, yeah? And you think these guys were moving at a breakneck speed. And I know you sort of touched on this, but it's easy just to go, how on earth did they get that so wrong? And yet just completely failed to understand the fact that they've done that sort of overnight, within hours. I don't know how many people were involved, all this. And I think there has to be some, I mean, I'm going to stay very firmly on the fence politically here, but there's got to be some acceptance of that sort of problem. Because if we took what they had to do into MedComms, you know, a typical MedCom scenario, our brains would burst, wouldn't they? Let's be honest about it. So let's at least let me put that point forward. There's been quite a few questions coming in. We'll try and bring this in, and some of them are picking up on the ABPI. I just like to pick up on that because, and it's sort of touching on what I'm sort of saying. You know, Dr. X, commentator Y on today, saying stuff that we couldn't do. The discussion around the dosage regimes, for instance, you know, the Pfizer problem, you know, well, that's the license regime. We can't recommend, we can't comment on something. Just there's a couple of comments coming in about ABPI being relaxed, the code of practice, and let's go wider than just the UK, code of practice type regulations being relaxed for pharma during a pandemic. I mean, is it an interesting idea even, or I mean, but is it at all practical? Have you got any thoughts on that aspect of the mix sort of thing?
I do. I don't know. I think hopefully at the least it might speed up some of the things that we do, because it does take, you know, a long time to get things done. And I think, you know, irrespective of actually the information of the pandemic, just living more virtually and digitally means that, you know, it now doesn't take half a year to get an ad board together. It can take 3 months. So I think the speed of getting comms out will increase. I think flexibility on what can be said is for me, maybe dangerous territory. I don't know if that's right. You know, I think that as soon as you go there, it undermines some trust. And I think, unfortunately, whatever was needed in the moment, we love, you know, retrospective analysis and critique. And I think that whatever was needed in the moment, 6 months' time, someone's going to pick up on it as, you know, having influenced X, Y, and Z that caused these problems. So I think actually the rigor probably will stay and probably should.
I agree, and I think
that leads to the inevitable problem. Sorry, that leads to the inevitable problem, doesn't it? Because if we're not saying anything, we're you know, it's just a vacuum that will be filled by the newspaper headlines and the commentators and all the rest of it. And you know, you have no control over that agenda. I mean, I agree with you, but I mean, real life is, and come back to your social media stuff, that, you know, by the time you've started to think about something, how many tweets have gone out, how many headlines have been written on the back of a tweet. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal how fast stuff is getting out there. And then it becomes an echo chamber thing. So the people who believe the bit they want to believe listen to all those headlines, see all those headlines, and it's all repeated back to them. And the others who don't go into a different echo chamber sort of thing. I mean, how does pharma win here? Sorry, Annette, I cut across.
Well, yeah, well, I was going to say something else, but you may be thinking something different now. I think, you know, there's kind of almost a role, you know, is there a role for pharma in educating the public in terms of how to actually understand and interpret communications and data? Because you're right, you can't influence what is being tweeted by, not just, I mean, we looked at HCPs, but obviously, as you know, Joe Bloggs down the pub is, you know, potentially tweeting and making a lot of noise about things that, you know, he doesn't actually know anything about whatsoever. And, you know, you can get into the whole anti-vax debate, you know, if we really wanted to. But yeah, I think the public needs to be educated in what they can believe and how they can differentiate between what is good advice and bad.
I think the other thing to say, and I don't know if this happened, but I think, you know, we picked on 3 groups that were communicating, and I don't know how well they communicated together. So obviously pharma can communicate about one thing, but I've got no idea how often AZ, Pfizer were talking to governments, probably not often, versus broad HCP. So I think, you know, we can say what we can say, but there should be group communication about what the overarching message should be, because they are all, you know, trying to come from the same perspective. So, yeah.
And I think what's interesting for me is that we don't, and apologies for disappearing and coming back, you know, is that there's not really maybe been a professional body or a patient group specifically. So I think a lot within a disease area, you would have a very well-respected professional association like ASCO for oncology, or, you know, the British Heart Foundation, if there was kind of specific messaging around a disease area. And I feel like the void of, you know, again, there being this kind of either patient body already, you know, available, or, you know, kind of set up, and you think as we move forward, that might be something that, you know, with these kind of multi-faceted conversations, that there is, I think, a gap for, you know, that independent communication that is credible and is, you know, communicating the right messages. And apologies if all of that was already mentioned while I wasn't here.
No. But it is, I mean, it's absolutely a minefield, isn't it? I mean, and I'm sitting here in Oxford, and Oxford's got some well-known professors who've been very publicly disagreeing with each other on some fairly fundamental issues, yeah? And so as a member of the public, one of the things presumably that I ought to think about is, you know, the credentials of the person that's talking on Twitter, let alone Radio 4 or something like that, yeah? But if they're all professors, let alone doctors or whatever, you know, which one do I believe most fair? You know, I mean, you know what I'm talking about with the mask wearing and things locally. I mean, it's been absolutely fascinating in some ways to be sitting here because it's local and seeing those guys on a global stage just disagreeing with each other, and having their entire camps following them. And it's, again, it's so divisive because that camp just simply believes that camp's wrong and therefore stops listening to them and just shouts louder. I mean, that is a very, very, very strange and frightening situation, I think, that has developed around us.
Yeah, and these things aren't normally things that the public see, are they? I mean, there's plenty of professional disagreements in congresses and all that kind of thing, but it's not normally in the limelight. So, yeah.
I don't know, there's no answer to it, but my God, it's lively out there, yeah?
No, it's hard to say because, you know, I think this is why we do so things methodically. I just hope it does speed up this process between different things and the communications, because I think even the communications within pharma companies are sometimes not optimal between the different functions, you know, medical, PR, etc. So I think hopefully people will analyse and look at where speed can be made to get some of the right communications out quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, because the lines are blurred now, aren't they? There's no, you know, because of the kind of social media, people are sharing things. So it's not like you kind of keep your channels kind of separately. Everything kind of ends up blending together. And yeah, you're right.
And I think it will. I think pharma is traditionally quite slow in terms of how it moves forward in its communications. And I would say probably people have an opinion that it was quite slow in terms of, you know, knowing how to work with social media, how to use that as a channel to communicate from a pharma company's point of view with all of the rules and the regulations. And you wonder with this, whether actually a lot of the companies have had to learn how to be more dynamic, learn how to have more agile processes. And hopefully, I'm hoping that those things will be pulled through into some of the other products that we work on, and actually all of the things that we've learned in this very stressful but specific time that will make them more dynamic and agile for their other brands that they're working on in the other disease areas that we might be supporting them with.
Just out of interest, I mean, I've got one eye on the clock. I always do at this stage, and we are a bit over time. So I'm going to wrap this up, I think, now from the point of view of the recording. But I just wondered, because this has been quite a lot about the UK, as it were. Just have you, this is maybe slightly unfair, but have you got any views on any good or bad points that you've seen outside the UK that you'd like to share, just to sort of wrap this up?
Well, I was thinking about this, and when you mentioned, because I think in one way, the UK, I think cross-country comparisons have irritated me quite a lot during this, because every country has had to deal with different demographics, different economies, etc. But I think, you know, the UK was so flexible in its wanting to balance economy, mental health, pandemic, etc. The shifts in messaging did create confusion. When I think you look at New Zealand, and it is a very different country, but they had a very strict, consistent line of what they were going to do and how they were going to achieve it. So even if it came under different sort of pressures of attack, it was consistent what they were going to do, and they didn't alter their course. So whether that, you know, is right and wrong in the long run, because we're not at the end of this pandemic, and you've got countries saying now that we're going to have to live with it, and we're going to have to get used to some level of annual incidents, which New Zealand won't have now. But I think they've come out of this looking fantastic, and I think it is that consistency. I mean, the US is another matter, but I might let Annette or Dale comment on that.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I wasn't going to go in the US. I think there's the range of belief around even the disease and whether it was real and what was it. And still in some countries, I was speaking to someone the other day of, there are still countries where actually they're denying that this is a problem. and you're not allowed to, talk about the fact that it's COVID, and they are not accepting of the vaccine and needing the vaccine in their country. And so the range of beliefs that are out there in terms of this is just so huge. And I think one of the things what we had talked about in the office was around that kind of all of the messaging around the masks and which countries picked that up quicker and which ones made those decisions quicker based on either the messaging or their beliefs or how they follow government rules. And I think that's probably the one where you can see the most difference between time frames of acceptance, and probably because it became quite a political thing, the topic of mask wearing in the US as well actually just became a political conversation rather than a health conversation.
Annette, do you want to just wrap this up with a final observation? But as I say, from a recording point of view, we probably ought to draw the line here. So what's your passing comment?
My passing comment on the different countries?
Yeah, or just on what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think on the country factor, I think the other thing just that comes into play is what people have experienced before in terms of how they accept new information. And I think that does that does relate to what we do. If we're coming in with something like completely new that no one's seen before, a new mode of action, a new type of drug, that's perhaps in some respects a more difficult communication to have than something that someone is already partway familiar with and they kind of grasp the concept. I think that was borne out. It's obviously not the only factor, but certainly in the mask wearing in sort of Asian countries where they've lived through these kind of similar pandemics in the past, and they understand what needs to be done. It's much easier in that they know what they have to do, they're told to do it, and they just get on with it. There's no debate about it. So I think that was another interesting kind of observation. But yeah, I mean, in terms of wrapping it up, I think this, like you said, there's just so many things we could have talked about. I think we only covered really scratched the surface, but yeah, we really enjoyed it, and hopefully everybody else did too.
Yeah, I think there's loads of stuff to think about in there. So, and this is a classic sort of meeting where I sit here and think, darn it, it's fascinating, but I want this to be a proper meeting where we're sort of in the same room together, and we're now going to go and have a drink in the bar, and we can be there all afternoon chatting about this. So unfortunately we can't be. So I'm going to draw the recording to a halt. Those of you in the audience, there's no need to rush away. We'll be here for another 10 minutes, so it's the top of the hour. But from a recording point of view, I'm going to draw it to a halt. Huge thank you to Annette and Drew and Diane. I know I'm saying this for all of you, but I know you're happy for me to say this. If anybody's interested in following up, to reach out to you, LinkedIn is the easy way of doing that. Yeah. And from my point of view, if you're interested in what we're doing at MedComms Networking, then medcommsnetworking.com will tell you everything. It's bang up to date with what we're planning. And if you are interested in these sorts of exercises, the webinars and so on, then as I said earlier, we've got NetworkPharma TV where we collate all these webinars. There's 300 odd videos there now, so it's becoming quite a useful resource in itself. But please reach out, make contact with us, whichever way. We'd love to hear from you. And for today, thank you very much. But everyone here, just give it a quick wave to say goodbye while I stop the recording. Okay, bye bye.